Hope everybody's having a nice evening so far. Just 1 second. Okay, we are good. All right, good evening. Welcome to the New York Studio School's virtual evening lecture series. Tonight, we are very, very pleased to be presenting Working on Paper, David Humphrey and Medrie MacPhee in discussion with Karen Wilkin. I would like to thank all of you out there for joining us. I can tell it's a very intellectual and stimulating crowd. And I would like to thank our panelists, David, Medrie, and Karen, for bringing this all together. Really appreciate you all taking the time to Zoom with us here on a Tuesday evening. This show, or the talk, is concurrent with the show at the New York Studio School on A Street in New York City. And that the show title is Works on Paper, which is on view now until Sunday, the 28th of February. So if you haven't seen the show, please do make an appointment and come visit us on A Street. Before we begin, I would also like to recognize that the New York Studio School Evening Lecture Series is generously supported in part by public funds from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs in partnership with the City Council, the Robert Lehman Foundation, and many individual contributors. Please do consider making a donation either during or after tonight's talk by clicking on the support button on our homepage at www.nyss.org. We really appreciate it. It wouldn't be possible without everybody's support to bring such amazing content to you like we are. I'll introduce our speakers for a second and then get out of the way, but I want to just point out the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and the chat button also at the bottom of your screen. You can put in questions at any time, and we're going to leave some time after the discussion to field some of those questions, but please do chime in. And that's it. So I'll quickly introduce the speakers and then turn it over to Karen. David Humphrey is a New York artist who has shown nationally and internationally. He has received a Guggenheim Fellowship and the Rome Prize, among other awards. An anthology of his art writing, Blind Handshake, was published by Periscope Publishing in 2010, and a new monograph on his work by Davy Lauterbach was published in 2020. He teaches in the MFA program at Columbia and is represented by Fredericks Freiser Gallery, where he recently exhibited some new paintings. Medrie MacPhee is a maker of paintings and works on paper, as well as the occasional designer of relaxwear. Medrie is the recipient of a John Simon Guggenheim Fellowship and numerous other awards, including the Anonymous Was a Woman and Pollock Krasner grants. Last year was her second time exhibiting at the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She currently has a solo exhibition of paintings at the Tibor Denage Gallery in the Lower East Side of New York. She also exhibits at Nicholas Medver Gallery in Toronto. Medrie is the Sherri, Burt, Hennessey Artist in Residence at Bard College. Curator and critic Karen Wilkin has written extensively on Anthony Caro, David Smith, Stuart Davis, and Helen Frankenthaler, among other modern artists, and organized exhibitions of their work internationally. The contributing editor for art for the Hudson Review and a regular contributor to the New Criterion and the Wall Street Journal, Karen teaches in the New York Studio School's MFA program. Please join me in giving a nice virtual welcome to Karen Wilkin, Medrie MacPhee, and David Humphrey.
Thank you, Sam. And hello, David and Medrie.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, Karen. Hi, David.
Haven't seen you since the opening. What I thought we would do, if we were live at the studio school, we would be projecting images on the wall behind us. So I thought what we would do is screen share And since I assume quite a few people watching have not had a chance to see the show in its actual magnificence, we would start with some installation shots that would give a flavor of the exhibition. And then we will alternate, begins with MacPhee, Humphrey, MacPhee, Humphrey, and I guess that'll go around as many times as we last. We'll be able to stop at any time if there's a work that you want to particularly discuss. But I think it will give a sense of what we're talking about. And it'll give everyone something to look at, which is also very good. This show began as Medrie and David know, when I brought my MFA 2 students to David's studio and saw on the wall this fantastic array of things, rather like what you see behind him on the screen, only much more so. And I thought, that would make a great exhibition. And then not long after that, I was at Medrie's studio and saw a whole lot of things on the wall. And I thought, wouldn't that be interesting to put those together? Because there's also a very strong link of friendship here. Medrie, I met David originally through you. I can't remember how long ago. So there's that connection. And so this very happily happened. David and Medrie, how did you two meet?
I think I can get to that. I met David, I think, I don't know, maybe mid-80s, and was already a big fan of his work. So I managed to winkle my way into a conversation with him and invited him over for a studio visit. And I did a studio visit with him, and then dinners and so on, and met other people through him, and he met other people through me. So we've been fairly inserted in each other's lives since then. So that goes back a long way.
It does.
There is no way that could happen now, because we met probably at an opening. We shot our mouths off.
Yeah.
We established contact, and then a studio visit, and then the next thing you know, we've got something.
Yeah.
A friendship.
Well, let's hope we have those opportunities again. And even if we do it with masks on, or at least you're looking at actual work, it helps.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. So I'm curious. David, you just had this wonderful show of some really tough and exciting paintings at Fredericks Freiser. And Medrie, you have a show of some astonishing paintings up right now at T-Bourdonnage. What we're showing at the studio school is all works on paper. What is the relationship of your works on paper to your paintings? Are they parallel? Are they preparatory? How does it work?
David, why don't you go first?
Okay. So my studio is kind of a boil of different activities. And so I'm almost always developing a lot of things at the same time. I kind of have to, so that I'll be developing protagonists or locations. That would be kind of a simple way of putting it. And hybridizing and looking at source material, Googling images. And at a certain point along the way, I'll have a clear idea for a painting, or a clearish enough idea. And then I'll start to develop works on paper around that, maybe color studies, different versions, until I have enough of a confidence in the image to kind of launch into the painting. At least that's how I work now. And so every painting in my exhibition probably has a cloud of works on paper floating around it, to give it a kind of context and connects it to other things. So yes, drawing is kind of just part of the living I said it already, ecology of the studio. I can't not have a million things going.
Mhm.
Medrie?
Well, it's kind of funny in a way because not exactly, but I would say that at one time I did work more like you in the sense that I would go out on location, I'd take pictures, I'd make studies, I'd bring them home, and then I'd kind of collage things together. And so in the end, it was a fiction that I was putting out there. It was a composite of many different things. But currently now, no, the drawings don't really have very much to do with the paintings other than maybe a kind of, existential view or something. But they're different in that there's a clear figure ground relationship there. And, they verge perhaps on anthropomorphism at times, but just really interested in shape as a thing. And but the paintings, there is no space like that. The paintings are very flat, so they don't. But then the other thing, because of course I've been thinking a lot about like what you do and what I do, is that I was thinking about how you've got your works on paper, you've got your paintings, and then you also have your sculpture, and that there's somehow they all collude in some way. I'm not quite sure how. And for me, I guess, even though I'm not as dedicated to making this line of relaxed wear as you are making sculpture, there is some way in which the making of that actually is critical to the drawings and the paintings. Somehow they come together. There's some kind of gestalt with all of them.
Of course, David, you could also argue that that kind of collision of diverse things is at the core of what you do. I mean, as long as I've known your work, it's been about making different painting languages have, if not a conversation, at least a debate. Everything from abex gestures to cartoon images.
I guess I'm thinking if I was to kind of build from that comment, which thank you, I think that's how it feels to me, that I think that Medrie in her drawings works with a kind of sociability of shape. I want to say that almost every drawing, there's a kind of intersubjectivity of shape, that those blobs, let's call them, are kind of interacting with each other. They make contact, they touch, they sometimes seem to articulate. And so I feel like, to connect to Karen's remark, that I would like there to be some kind of intersubjectivity between languages, let's say, whether it's an abstract gesture or it's a figure, that there's a kind of interacting between them that is like a sociability. That yes, that might be dissonant, or maybe they barely understand each other, but that counts still within the realm of a conversation. And maybe that's even happening between Medrie's work and mine in this case.
I think it very much is. I mean, when we started laying the work out, we the three of us were in Medrie's studio, we were in your studio, saying this one, this one, this one. And when we got them all together, suddenly the order in which they needed to be placed on the wall where we alternate just fell into place. These two wanted to talk to each other. These two were cousins. These two hadn't met, but were getting along. It was fascinating. But I agree with you. I mean, these blobs, for lack of a better word, have incredible personalities. They are each one is a very distinct individual.
I love the idea that that the works and maybe some of the images within the works have desires, that they want something.
Yeah.
And what do they want? I mean, that gets played out in your mind. I mean, here that's the case. The one right showing there. I mean, there's an intersubjectivity of blobs.
Yeah. It's as though some of Medrie's blobs are migrating into your work at this point.
But there's also something, it's interesting when you were saying about communication, and I was thinking about I mean, it's in your drawings as well, but especially noteworthy in your paintings where there'll be something going on. There'll be some kind of recognizability, however minimal, of person, place, thing. And then beside that, there'll be like a kind of really free-handed sort of abstract expressionist-y kind of gesture. And the thing that's odd about them is that they're trying to, they seem to almost mirror each other, or they're in translation with each other, and they seem kind of, what's the word I want? That you can't take them apart.
Mhm.
The one is entirely reliant on the other.
Well, that's a trick. That's what I work for. I mean, it doesn't, that part is a kind of a craft. And maybe it's a version of, I don't want to say it's translation, but it's like, oh, I don't know, life coaching, like, come on guys, get along with each other.
I remember reading one of Picasso's smart-ass remarks, where he says that he puts everything he likes into his paintings, and the things just have to get along as best they can.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. But what Medrie said, I think, has become in some ways even more acute in some of the recent work, which is the work in your painting show was very overtly informed by recent horrific events. And there were glimmers of images like this that were far more recognizable in this drawing, that became almost abstracted forms that were still charged with the memory of police brutality and George Floyd and all these things that were resonating with that, but you weren't being specific. You were being very elusive.
Well, I in fact started them before the Black Lives Uprising, just because I thought that this idea of the violence worker and the way the police have the effect that the police has on our collective identity. They both are employed by us, and can be against us. And so I just wanted to spend time thinking about that in the way individuals would be addressed by that kind of brute force. And so I didn't want it to be topical. In a way, I wanted people to find their own relationship to that subject. It just had to do with power and the collectivity and a kind of matter with some urgency to it. And then when the events exploded, I was in fact disoriented. I thought maybe I should step back from this. That the reality can have the effect of making our little fictional exercises very paltry, very weak. But then I kind of thought, well, that weakness, that the artist as a kind of something a little bit to the side and maybe weak, has within it a kind of, the ingredients of some other kind of strength, the ability to make metaphors, to alter how we think of things, the way things are organized, the way they hang together. I think artists can provide metaphors for that.
But I think the metaphorical quality of those images, the ambiguity of those images was part of what made them so potent, because they were certainly not illustrative in any way. They were provocative, but not illustrative. So I think you've succeeded.
The sociability of the image, and I think this goes back to Medrie also, is that you want to make a space for the spectator. You want to craft for them maybe a role or the beginning of a role in which their kind of interaction with it is not just passive. It's not just kind of reading what you put in, but is actively engaged in completing and propelling some of the potentialities, the potentials.
I think that certainly happens in Medrie's work, and certainly in the works on paper here. And I keep thinking, Medrie, you have a kind of history of making art about dystopias.
Mm-hmm.
The very first works of yours I ever saw back in the late Bronze Age when we first met were paintings of parts of the urban environment that might get ignored or deliberately ignored by people who found that kind of industrial infrastructure distressing in some way. And then those became increasingly abstracted and a little bit sinister. And then imagery evolved over time, becoming increasingly abstract, but also carrying with this sense of its not being, you never painted Arcadia, as far as I know. And I think some of that is in these works on paper, which I think are marvelous solemnity and the kind of rituals being enacted. And they're also a little bit funny. And I think that combination is very, very engaging. And that's something, David, that you've done as well. I mean, you'll throw a cartoon image, you'll throw in not in this series, but in previous work, there'll be an adorable white dog in the middle of what appears to be an extremely high-minded setting. And of course, now we've got all the urban detritus coexisting with the abex gesture. This scale shift, which I find very interesting.
Well, Karen, you wanted to...
I just want to say, how much of this, of Medrie, of the dystopian quality of these, a lot of these were made during the lockdown, weren't they?
Yeah. Well, almost all of them, actually. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I was thinking that, for, I guess, a few decades in a way, just to have a circle around which I was thinking. I was preoccupied with the idea of just humans as a species and survival, and whether we would survive and how we were surviving. And so that industrial stuff that you're talking about, those are kind of, I don't know, when is that? The 80s probably. I was thinking of them as sort of the dinosaurs of the 20th century. And that at one point, the language surrounding them was full of idealism about the future. And now they're just like they're rusting away and falling apart. And, there were other there was a Floating World series, and then there was a Future Species, which was about sort of human and animal body parts conjoined with industrial bits and pieces, but still burdened by human emotion, getting into jams with each other, having to flee the scene. That it was, so in other words, that a kind of dark humor has always been something that maybe leavened the dystopian aspect of what I was doing, that somehow it seemed very important. And I also agree that David has that in his work too.
Well, in a way, when I think about those early works of yours, they seem like they're trying to, and this is the connection to maybe the trash in my new paintings, but you're crafting an image of disorder. There's a kind of either entropic or maybe post-traumatic sort of array of forms that are sprayed about, except for you've crafted them and put them into place, and that enacts a kind of a beautiful paradox. I feel like your new things, and especially the ones in the show, are very, there's a kind of a play against the containment of each of these forms, that they have a kind of a boundary that gets only kind of vexed by little extensions or spray of things. do you feel like they're like that these are kind of psychological allegories of like being a person, and that maybe you've kind of, in your maturity, let's say, that you've kind of evolved out of that kind of delight in ruin?
Well, we've got enough ruin around us.
Yeah, no, that's there's something very comical about that, what you just said. Well, I guess, I've always, and I think this is also something that we share maybe, is that I've always been interested in disordering the viewer, like creating a space where they were thrown off, that was asymmetrical, or looked like you could enter, but then nothing made sense about it. I mean, in a way, sort of going back to metaphysical painting like De Chirico, where there's multiple vanishing points that don't make any sense and so on. And I don't really know how to answer what the other part of it, psychological. Yeah, I guess they're sort of about the consciousness of consciousness or something, I don't really necessarily feel like they're me in any way, if that makes sense. It's not like something I'm describing personally about my life or anything like that. It's a state of being, or a consciousness of being a human.
Well, they're very, what's the word? They're stripped in a way. Their blobness is to have them stripped of defining characteristics, like clothing or eyes or features, something like that.
Yeah.
And so in a way, they become a kind of stand-in for being or beings with characteristics and still, kind of some degree of what I'm calling sociability. They kind of hang out with others, wanting things, or, being affected by these others. Maybe they're like organs. But also I'm thinking, and this is a question for you, Medrie, maybe Karen, you would have some perspectives on this. I feel like we both have an interest in modern art, certain aspects of modern art that we're trying to not reference necessarily, but trying to kind of grow from. And I think of the biomorph, let's say, would be a case that has modern art pedigree. Is that?
From my point of view, as a looking from the outside, and having spent a fair amount of time in both of your studios over the years, there's a sense of you're being in a continuity with the history of art. It's not the postmodern idea of rupture. It's this is part of a tradition in terms of the sensuality of your surfaces, and even your approach to space and your approach to certain kinds of forms. I just wanted to get back to what you had said, Medrie, about wanting to somehow disorient your viewer. And I think one of the things that does that, and in this series of work, and David, you've been doing also in recent work, is a shift in scale that disrupts your preconceptions. The very small elements suddenly played against much larger ones. Does that make any sense?
Not yet.
So let's wait till one of them, till an example comes up.
Okay.
I'm thinking of the way, you're with David's paintings, you're reading a big gesture and you suddenly discover there's all this tiny, meticulously done garbage on the ground, or there's a little figure in the background, and suddenly your sense of the space of the work has changed. And I think you don't do it in all of them, but in some of them you have very small, of the works on paper, you have very small elements that play against the larger shapes, and again, dislocate the space.
I mean, one thing that interests me, I find myself not able or unwilling sometimes to talk about what happens with spectators. I don't really think about like, how can I do this or that to the spectator? But I do try to think about what happens to myself. And
Hang on one second. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking of. There's very small elements in that rectangle, which are in a very different spatial relationship to the larger shapes and the superimposed drawn squared off shape. Anyway, David, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm trying to follow up on that, on what you initiated there. And I guess for me, and maybe playing with figure ground does a bit of that, and playing with scale does it, but I would like to somehow jigger or dislocate or destabilize the terms of recognition. Like, how do we recognize something as this or that? If you can somehow just remove or displace some of the key features of that, then I feel like consciousness rolls back in and becomes engaged. So like, what do you call them? Lacunae or blanks, and I'm looking at that painting behind you, Medrie, kind of playing with figure and ground. This painting, by the way, on the screen now, I think is the nearest thing to you and I doing a dance.
I like it. Yeah.
Medrie, it's like,
which one are you?
yeah.
No, but it's interesting what you said, because it is true that, I mean, I think for me, the biggest change actually in some ways, well, two, flatness and tactility. I've gotten really interested in surface in a way that I never did before. And feeling a need to actually have materiality, have something that, you can feel that it has weight to it. Whereas before, most of my paintings had been, more in the picture realm, and tended to be flatter, and tended to be more readable. But what David is talking about, which I've become really kind of fascinated by and engaged by in the works on paper, is that idea of like, how far can you go with a shape where it still is evoking something, even though in and of itself, it's nothing. It's a nothing. Like something like this. I mean, it obviously has some kind of logic or reference to it. I don't know what that is myself, but I'm very attracted to it, and it feels very real to me as something.
You stage them like, here it is, here's the protagonist, or here's the two protagonists. Whereas the one behind you, the paintings seem like they don't do that in the same way.
No. The paintings are more all over. The shapes don't separate out in the same way. Yet when you start getting involved in the component parts of the paintings, you discover there's a kind of the DNA is similar.
Right. But you sort of scan it in a very different way. You take it in a very different way. But I don't feel any need to try and bring the works on paper into some kind of real correspondence with the paintings. I'm happy to let them live separate lives,
Which they do very successfully. Someone, when you were talking about tactility and physicality, I mean, that's certainly very, very true of the big paintings, which begin as essentially collages of fabric. But one of my students asked whether elements in these works on paper were collaged on.
Oh yeah,
You know, the paint elements,
yes.
which, you know, feel almost as though they're in another world. Yeah.
Yeah, no, everything is collaged on. And
Yeah.
in some of the works on paper, there's also fabric
Mhm.
as well.
There's some nifty pantyhose in one of them.
Actually, it's not pantyhose,
Well,
but close to it.
close to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not true of all of them, but I'm having this idea, and it resonates in my own practice, in which sometimes it seems like you're repairing something that's either broken or needs.
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
So this kind of
Yeah.
oscillation between breaking and repair, I think, has a kind of very rich way of first kind of staging or, you know, thematizing your labor as the maker and the destroyer, but also somehow gives the thing a kind of dynamic quality of contingency, like it's coming into being, or it could break again, and, you know, like these things feel like they're kind of taped on, or maybe there's kind of bandages, you know, like you're putting little.
No, that's absolutely right. I mean, that's kind of like a core position almost, where that's all we do in life is repair, basically. We're just repairing as we go forward, and you know, trying to hold it all together.
I think we as we look at these things, we mentally recapitulate that process and think, well, this happened. What happened to it? Why is this imposed on it? And it becomes you were talking about in the viewer becoming engaged in the work. It's very, very potent, that engagement.
Sure, I think that's.
Have we run through all the images? Sam, can we go back to the beginning or go backwards or something? Here we go.
Karen, I think that's, you're hitting on something that to me is like very deeply connected to why artworks, handmade artworks, matter.
Yes.
And part of it has to do with the weird intimacy of crafting something with your hands that a viewer has a kind of vicarious sense of what that might have felt like. I mean, it's maybe a little bit like watching sports or something, or even like mirror neurons. When you look at somebody do something, there's something in your brain that kind of enacts it. And so it establishes an intimacy and a kind of a weird form of sociability with others who are kind of following, you know, the moves, the decisions, you know, with a whole other kind of weather of associations, but that it's kind of underwritten by this kind of more material identification with, you know, the physical activity.
So you mean sort of like the relief of recognition in some way?
Not even. I mean, what I was thinking about, and perhaps David, if I'm reading you right, I think David's agreeing with me. We have a sense of the hand, of the action of the hand, of the person behind that hand.
Okay. Okay.
And you know, you get it in sculpture in a different way. I mean, I've always felt that with both David Smith and Anthony Caro's sculpture, you experience it kinetically, that you though you feel yourself extending the distance of that piece of steel in your body in some way. And what isn't there, I find, you know, sculpture that doesn't do that can be pretty inert.
Well, the amazing thing with those guys, and maybe this is like what, you know, like a certain kind of heady metal, you know, like, oh my God, these are slabs of steel, but I can kind of feel, yeah, I just know what that feels like to put that thing.
Yeah. But not only that, but I mean, it's oh yeah, that's what it feels like to reach that far.
Right.
You know?
I have a question for you, David, and it came from reading the monograph that just came out on you, because I think it's a funny and fascinating story, and it's about George Romero, the filmmaker, and I'd like you to tell the story, and also if you could say something about how maybe that, the way that you distilled that experience into paintings and drawings and so on, how that memory worked for you, or how memory works for you in what you're doing.
It's a little complicated. The simple part of it is, the strange part of it is that I was working with images from my family album in the early 90s. I was making paintings from snapshots that I took and in the family album. And then I kind of had a moment where I'm like sick of it, like, fuck the family. Why am I spending time with them? You know? But then all of a sudden this film comes out by George Romero. I'm from Pittsburgh. The house that I grew up in was on the market. My parents had sold it a few years before, and the people who bought it were reselling it. And George Romero's location scouts found it and thought it was a perfect location for the movie The Dark Half. And it was really strange because the house is very conspicuous in this movie. And so I made paintings based on the George Romero stills. So it was kind of like this weird, uncanny experience of finding really intimate, personal material out in mass culture. And I thought it would be kind of a perverse collaboration with George Romero to grab frames, erase his material from it, and then plug back in my own image repertoire to the, into those blanks. And so in a way, I sort of embarked on it as an experiment in like, what would it feel like? What would emerge? He's telling a story based on something that I experienced, and I'm telling a story sort of bank shot off of his. And so new works emerged, and they had a kind of a life and a character that was kind of weird. It was sort of personal and media derived at the same time.
So what years would that have been that you were doing that?
That's probably the mid to late 90s.
So, was that about the time that you started to work with Photoshop? And although actually, was Photoshop even invented then? I actually can't remember. But you started mashing up a lot of different sources together into work. Was it sort of about that time, or
yes, it was exactly at that time, because it was the moment at which Photoshop became available to consumers. Memory was good enough. I mean, I remember working with Photoshop and always having to flatten the image. You couldn't keep the layers because you'd run out of memory. But the whole language of compositing, of mixing sources in the language of Photoshop was hugely productive for me. And in some ways I metabolized it, and I kind of do it automatically now.
Did you have to, did you feel like you kind of had to give yourself permission to do something like that? Like, was it just like, oh, of course I'm going to do this? Or was it sort of like, well, should I do this? Or
No, I was eager. This was a gift from the gods, because I was already working with technology, trying to bring in photomechanical voices. A way to get outside of subjectivity, to kind of complicate the first person character of a painting by othering, by using either technology or found sources or quotation, to a more complicated notion of the self, especially the privileged artist self. And so Photoshop was great at that. I don't know if that's what your question is, but I mean, the idea of like having many voices coexist inside this kind of theater of the painting could be kind of enacted very directly with Photoshop.
No, it's funny actually, because I remember a talk or a panel that you were part of at the New School, I think. And you were talking about it. And I was slightly abashed. I mean, in that I thought, oh, this is really fascinating. You were so coherent about it, but it sort of was like, oh my God, like that seems like so, like I wouldn't do that, or I couldn't do that. And yet, you know, of course, over time, we've all learned how to use Photoshop in one way or another to our advantage, not necessarily in the same way that you do it. But I guess I did have a question that I had written down that I wanted to ask you, and I want to say it and read it. So in your new catalog, you talk about colliding languages of representation against one another, like a quiet war among styles. What's your goal in colliding all these genres together? Or maybe maybe I shouldn't say what's the goal, but I mean, that really does in some ways characterize what your work has been for, I don't know, 10 years, 15 years, maybe longer. I don't know, lost track of time. But what, I mean, you've sort of answered it, but not completely, I guess.
So if, I mean, I could do it. I have a reductive, overly simplified answer. I mean,
Okay.
there is the kind of convention of postmodernism, the kind of pictorial convention in which the like different languages are sort of rubbed against each other or forced to coexist in the service of criticality. Somehow, you know, if you take languages, it kind of posits the idea of the artist as the sort of zoomed out, analytic brain who can, you know, who's outside of it and sees all the ideologies and mechanisms at work. I was a little more interested in a kind of the psychological dimension of that, so that when those that I guess my fantasy is that consciousness is something like that language, memories, media images, other people's words, other people are all kind of tangled in the way we experience consciousness. It's not just ours. It feels like ours, but it really is a sort of a smoothing over of all of that. And I guess, you know, maybe if I have a painting in which those things are kind of coexisting a little bit unassimilated, it's trying to make a metaphor.
Okay. Sounds a lot like Finnegan's Wake.
The what?
It sounds a lot like Finnegan's Wake.
Yeah, thank you. I think, you know, that would be a very flattering analogy. And of course, you know, I'm trying to do it
I think that what you're describing is very much what I think Joyce was aiming at.
Yeah, and I think that's
finding language that replicated the way consciousness works.
We have to, I mean, our job as living people is to update our, you know, what that means in our experience, our historic moment, our, you know, the terms of, I don't know, Pop-Tarts and internet platforms and TikTok, whatever, you know, like.
You could argue, Medrie, that you're doing something not dissimilar in these works on paper, where, you know, this sense of playing with our sense of what is actual, what is fictive, the physicality played against the flatness of the paper. If you concentrate on some of them, you find small fragments of the real world that, you know, buttons, in the previous one, tabs from jeans, belt tabs from jeans. There's that constantly shifting our awareness in a that they end up looking very different than anything David does, although there's still this conversation among the blobs. But I think ideologically, you can make a case for this being not entirely dissimilar. You're not making portraits of yourself. When you were talking about the consciousness of consciousness.
Right. Right.
I'm going to jump in, Medrie. You seem, while you're gathering your thoughts.
Please do.
I want to say that I think that Karen is right, and that you do that also in a different sort of way, and that in some ways your work is in a comic mode. I want to say there's a kind of a jaunty, slightly cartoony character to the interactions that these are having with each other, and that if there is, and in terms of consciousness, I feel like you are kind of positing a sort of an idea of like a self that's kind of reduced and stripped down, minus all the kind of hairdos and fashion and the crappy bits. And then you've got these kind of the pure, Mr. Blue and Mrs. Red or something. And there's something kind of funny.
It was stripped down to abjectness and I don't know. Yeah, burlesque. Yeah. No, I think
that's a wonderful word.
Well, I think that's true. I like that. I mean, it's funny when you were saying that, I was thinking also, like, my English grandparents were British vaudevillians, and my grandfather was what you would like a sort of a clown, and so maybe it's in the genes.
Yeah, look at
that's really interesting.
That's hilarious.
I mean, they're funny at the same time, but they're very passionate. What are they doing to each other? Because they have each of the forms has such a potent character as an individual.
Well, I guess for me, like in some the how do I put this? The way that incredible pain and humor, or darkness and humor, come together for me is like, it's right up there in terms of like aspiration. I think that's like where I like to live, basically, because it's sort of like you're getting the picture, you're not naive, you're getting the picture, you're seeing how it is, but what can we do with this? Because we're sort of we have to go forward somehow.
I mean, I don't know if you feel this, but I feel like I'm onto something in a work if I get if one of two responses. If I feel like, what the fuck is that? That's a win. And if I get a chuckle out of it, it's like, and I think they're related to each other.
Yeah, sure.
Related to each other because they have to do with undermining expectations, and like that's really hard to do to yourself. It's like you can't really tickle yourself.
Well, it's all about surprise. It's like surprising yourself.
Yeah.
Because it is a real relationship. I mean, I sometimes say to my students, your job is not just to impose yourself on what you're doing. It's like, it really is a conversation. It's a relationship, and you have to pay attention, see what's happening in there.
You have to leave room for discovery.
Right.
Yeah, and that involves something that's not you. It seems like discovery is completely contingent on something not you rolling in.
Yeah.
And so that's why.
Well,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's exactly the same thing in writing about work. If I'm paying attention to what I'm looking at, and I'm trying to find words that are somehow faithful to my experience, if I get out of my own way, I will find that I'm talking about something I didn't know I had seen. That's a very similar thing.
You nailed it. That's great.
Doesn't happen all the time. I wish it did. I think this would be a good place to open it up to questions, because otherwise we could keep doing this until about 4 a.m.
Okay.
So, Sam, I think you were going to field the questions for us.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll so just remind everyone that, well, I'll give an applause for everyone as we normally would in person. That was a really generous talk. While people sort of put their questions in, I'll just remind you, you can click on that Q&A and type something in, and I'll read it to our panelists. Let's see. There was an early comment by Leslie about the weakness that David was speaking of, and I think you guys went into that more, the expression of vulnerability. The weakness you speak of, David, is an expression of vulnerability, and that's very interesting.
Is there a question there?
It's really just the comment, but I think it comes into what you guys were just.
Well, thank you. I mean, I guess I'm partially, I think that's true on the kind of, you know, the psychological personal level, but then there's the weakness of, well, first of all, there's like the weakness of the individual in relationship to large global forces, like climate change, let's say. You know, like the individual is just radically and, you know, existentially weak, and then political forces and down the line. And so I guess part of what I was trying to kind of work through was like the artist as a person in the social has so little power. And like we can kind of huff and puff and work our, you know, think of ourselves as being critical or being analytic or kind of, so, you know, socially progressive, but, you know, what are the effects of that? We have to kind of, each one of us has to kind of navigate that kind of, I want to say, essential weakness as a kind of position that has merits, that actually has the ability to maybe say things, think things, enact things. I mean, it's kind of not really a thesis that I'm having. It's just sort of trying to work it out. I mean, what do you guys think about that? I mean, it's a little bit of a lament, but still like to make work. I still can't help it. I still believe in it.
Yeah. So I think we're, you know, everyone's feeling overwhelmed and has last year, or maybe the last 4 years until the last election. But the, you know, as Medrie says, you have to keep moving ahead. Otherwise, you're just navel gazing.
Well, there was actually, when you were talking, David, there was another thing that I had written down from looking at your book that I thought was really wonderful. And you were talking about Guston's work, and you said, the habitats emerge tactily the way one imagines a space by blind groping. His work argues that we are made of the same stuff as the things we make or consume. And I thought that was great. I mean, I think that's in a measure kind of what you were just saying, you know.
Yeah, thank you. I forgot I wrote that.
Clever boy.
It's really good. Very good. Very good.
There is a question here from Jesse. Can one or both of you talk about materiality, how you work with materials of paper and paint, problems of paper, curling, glue, exhibiting works on paper, etc.?
Medrie, I think it's your turn.
I guess I don't quite understand the question. Could you repeat it again?
Can one or both of you talk about materiality, how you work with the materials of paper and paint, problems of, there's like the physical problems, I think, of problems of paper being paper, curling, and things like glue and exhibiting works on paper, but and then I think more generally about the materiality of materials.
Do you want me to toss something out, Medrie, that I think
Sure.
you might go with? One of the things about working on paper is that it has a kind of ease. You can tear it up, you just tear it off the sheet, you can spit on it, you know, put something else on and not care as much, and that particular freedom recommends it. Okay, so the materiality.
That's true. Yes.
Materiality is another question in a way, because you always want your materials to have some kind of metaphoric potential. So in the case of paint, it's kind of gooey and bodily, and you know, in the case of pencils, there's another set of associations that are clothing. Let's say in your case, Medrie, and it looks like you're using this kind of mucky, thick stuff. I feel like all of that has content. It's sort of incipient. That's waiting. It's sedimented in it. And that your job is to kind of liberate that.
Well, yeah, no, that's definitely true. It's inherent, and you know, that's where I kind of ended up after I started to move away from painting imagery, was that I somehow wanted the materiality of the painting to be the meaning of the painting, that they would be inextricably bound together. I think you're right about paper. I guess but the other thing too is that in a way I've always kind of welcomed, corrections, failures, having to figure out how to fix something that went wrong and come up with a new way of thinking about it. It's, I guess I feel like I'm not interested in seamlessness at all. Quite the contrary. I like coming up against problems. I like making problems for myself that I then have to go in and do something with.
So my guess, Medrie, is that these are kind of finished works on paper. But you might probably also have sketchbooks and the equivalent of doodles. And I think one of the things that people like about drawing is that there's a kind of an intimacy that that sometimes you feel when you look at a work on paper, that you're overhearing the artist having a conversation with themselves. There's a certain kind of ruminative, experimental possibility. These I think this particular body of work by you are like, these are finished things.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, totally.
I didn't really address the person's question about materiality, but
yeah, materiality is a big deal for me. But David,
I think you can see even on screen the so much of a part of what's potent about Medrie's works on paper is this very rich orchestration of surface inflection. Not just different shapes and different colors. There's a real difference in the character of what is this line made of, the delicacy of that loop on the edge, the bluntness of the big black shapes, and all of that is very, very important. Which is why it's so wonderful that we got to show them without having to put them under glass.
oh yeah, absolutely. That's the way drawings should be seen most of the time.
yeah, there's a kind of tectonic character to them. I mean, in this case, say, like if we get like one we just saw, I feel like you've even found a way to metaphorize the support, the chunk of paper, that holds the whole thing inside the picture with there's a little picture in the upper left, and then each of the shapes is kind of rendered in a thick kind of blacktop. Almost.
I like that.
They're tectonic. Right. It makes me think of that great Smithson piece, where the truck comes up to the hill and dumps the asphalt.
Dumps the asphalt. But then others, this feels like some kind of demented machine. They have these wonderful
I'm not
overtones. I know you're not. I'm not asking.
But David, what about your materiality? Where would you take it?
It's always alive in it, and so like in this case, I was working on a great big painting, and I was making a gesture with one of these mops, like a mop that has these little um, I don't know what they're little nubbins or something, and I had this mop saturated with paint, but I'd completed the gesture on the painting. Now what am I going to do with that? That would be a waste of paint. So then I just kind of like found this big sheet of paper and like
That's funny.
did an arbitrary move. And so okay, so this has to do with materiality. I hate waste. I couldn't waste the paint. I couldn't waste a mop loaded with paint. So whatever, that's a kind of sub theme in the thing. And it took me months and months to kind of figure out how to make that into something.
Sam, have you got another question for us that we can be?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to try and combine one. The first is a comment, and then there's a question that I think relates to everything. The comment is from Sharon, and she says, "It strikes me how these artists are really willing to go to the edge of things without trying to define them. I'm wondering if this is part of being in New York, or if that's because you may still be part of the studio school community." And then the question from an anonymous person is relating to David's comment, needing to undermine expectations to yourself. I'm wondering whether you feel that more on a narrative level or material level. And the same question for Medrie.
Well, I feel it on both levels. I feel in order for the thing to have vitality, it needs to be kind of always somehow skidding off of the one thing into the other thing in a productive like cycle. For some reason, it's triggering a reminder. This is a little bit of a fancy allusion, but Theodore Adorno famously didn't like jazz. And of course, I think he didn't write that much about it. And I think the jazz that he understood was just like, cafe kind of background music. But one of the things he said about it was that it was like constantly stumbling. Like syncopation was this kind of stumble, one after the other, tripping and stumbling. And I think that is a really interesting, cool idea about establishing a relationship to expectations. That's, you can't really ever elude them because the brain is a expectation machine. It's always anticipating something that it already knows. That's how we can kind of navigate the world without going nuts, seeing too much. But as artists, I feel like our job is to always refresh that, to kind of throw it off. So this kind of throwing off of expectations at the iconographic level and the material level is to me like a deep challenge. So I think it's a good question. To stumble, to cause kind of stumbling that turns out to have a syncopated rhythm that actually maybe it's kind of jive, maybe it swings or does something else.
I almost don't really know quite how to understand, how to answer that question exactly. I just kind of get involved in sort of the maelstrom of the studio and what's going on. And I'm almost not, me as myself, I'm not really there in a certain way. I mean, I'm there, of course, I'm making decisions and so on, but I'm looking for clues, I'm on a treasure hunt or something. I don't know. And then also because of the way I work, which is, there's a lot of collaging of things going on, the collaging of clothing when I'm making a wearable, the collaging on paper, the collaging of clothing on canvas. It's all about putting parts together or something. And so I don't know whether that has something to do with trying to undermine, your what's the word I want? The general in your brain or something, where you're trying to do everything you can to avoid being taken over. You're letting it happen, you know.
You're getting out of your own way.
You're getting
setting
out of thank you, Karen. I was getting like
you're
a little too
setting up a
complicated.
situation where you
Yeah.
where you can't anticipate. You're doing all kinds of things that are bypassing preconception.
Yeah. And I'm trying to keep it as open for as long as possible before I start to sort of shut it down. Just keep the whole thing in play for as long as possible.
But in a way, we're kind of talking about two things. Like you're talking about a state of flow, let's say in the studio, where you're really truly in the kind of fluid activity of making and correcting, and what does this need, and you work on this and you see something that's needed over there. But this other self that you have is the one, you come in the morning and you're like, what did I do? Is this any good? And what kind, how do I do that? And how does this
right brain, left brain?
Yes, that. So, I don't think you can consciously worry about spectators and playing with their expectations, blah, 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 while you're in that flow state. Forget it.
No.
But
that flow state is when you can bypass your own expectations.
Absolutely. That's why it's flow. But meanwhile, you can trust the fact that you've been working for like your whole goddamn life.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah. I mean, there is a certain point, I think, I don't know what decade I was at when I really did feel that I had managed to take my ego out of the process, where something could be really terrible, objectively really terrible, and I wouldn't take it personally. I just think this is really terrible. And then, just keep going.
I think you have a moral obligation to make crappy work sometimes.
Yeah, so do I. No pain, no gain.
Right.
And by the way, do you really know that it's crappy? I mean, are you sure?
I would say most of the time I'm sure. Yeah.
Look at you.
Maybe a couple more. Susan's asking, can you both discuss a little more about the role of humor in your work? Comic relief, ? Did your work start with it or enter in later? Was there an aha moment where you realized that this was an essential part to your work? Sorry.
David.
Because I brought it up in relationship to your work. I thought you're the funny man in the group, but it matters to me. And no, I don't set out. To me, I find it. I can't make it. I mean, to me, like a stand-up who kind of crafts jokes. I mean, that's amazing. I can't even imagine it. But if I can make a painting that's funny, thumbs up. But I think, but if I see someone trying to be funny, or if there's an artwork that I encounter that I feel it has designs on me, that it has a kind of rhetorical overbearingness, like either to be funny or instructive or intelligent, I don't buy it. I'm like, I'd rather find it myself. Mm-hmm. So this thing of humor sort of is a challenge, because I don't want to put it in there consciously. I want it to emerge.
Yeah, I think you can't. It's sort of like somebody who's going to tell you a joke and they start laughing before they tell you the joke. Kind of kills the magic.
Right. Or like at a dinner party, someone says, "Okay, everyone shut up. I have a joke."
Oh.
Yeah. It happens or it doesn't happen.
Right. There's a big drum roll and here it comes. You ready?
Yeah.
Oh, ha, ha. Anyway, but it's a good question. Okay, Sam, what's next?
Next, we have a comment from Lisa. She says, we are living in a time of rupture, environmental, political, cultural. I think these works in painting as a form is tough, can deal with toughness, but painting can also get caught up formalist and aesthetic debates and stay there. I see your work addressing this, but can you comment on this? How are you navigating this? Thanks, Lisa.
I would like Karen to answer that, because I feel like, Karen, you have spent a lot of time in the formalist trenches, and that you...
Well, unlike people in Soviet Russia, I don't regard formalist as a tainted word. Even work that purported to be about addressing the I and being about formal relationships ends up being about a lot of other things as well, because it's made by human beings. And you can't keep being a human being out of it. Occasionally you see work that looks like it, human beings are out of it, and that tends to be really, really terrible work. I mean, I'm thinking of Vasarely, for example, which looks manufactured. So any work of art that isn't formal, let's keep it in paintings and works on paper, that isn't formally satisfying, you're not going to want to look at, no matter how well intentioned or how poignant the subject matter. You can't separate these things out, as far as I'm concerned, anyway.
I mean, I feel like jumping in with a sort of odd definition of the formal. I mean, to me, like when I think of the formal aspects of my own work, I think of how they hang together. What are the principles of order?
Exactly.
What's the disposition of it? How does it make sense? Now that's from, the material conditions and the kind of, some kind of reduced under language of the image, but rather it has to do with disposition, posture, coherence, mess, that in a way, like the most formal, like formality as such is underwritten by its opposite. It doesn't make any sense without this other thing. And so I guess in a way, I kind of like to include that other thing inside the picture. So maybe that's formal.
As I said, I just don't think you can separate out these elements, which goes from everything from intention to implied narrative to disguised narrative, whatever words you want to put to it. If it isn't hanging together in some way, we're going to be profoundly unsatisfied by it. That doesn't mean that you don't want tension. We've talked about surprise. You don't want it to be predictable, but there's got to be some underlying coherence.
And maybe there's something kind of beautiful about the weird utopian idea of of artists that we would call formalist, that they imagined that they could boil painting down to its kind of essential characteristics. That seems actually kind of weird and perverse and historically interesting.
Well, modernism in general, and certainly in architecture and in design, started out with that kind of utopian ideal. And there's an interesting show, a rather exhausting show at MoMA right now, with the astonishingly pretentious title of Engineer, Agitator, Constructor, which is dealing with geometry and abstraction as a utopian propaganda. And it starts out with Bolshevik, the early days of the Bolshevik Revolution, when modernism and abstraction were equated with something that is anti-bourgeois and is signaling this new world. It's an interesting show. Those intentions vanished very quickly.
Or they turned into crypto-authoritarian principles.
And then you get 1934, you got the All Union Writers Conference that says none of this is any good. We can only do socialist realism.
Could I just hear that question one more time? I don't know if I have anything to add to it, but it was pretty dense, and I'm not sure that I really understood it.
I sure didn't. I didn't answer it properly.
Lisa,
Neither did I.
the question from Lisa, could
Okay.
it be repeated?
Yeah. We are living in a time of rupture, environmental, political, cultural. I think these works and painting as a form is tough, can deal with toughness, but painting can also get caught up formalist and aesthetic debates and stay there. I see your work addressing this, but can you comment on this? How are you navigating this?
Well, you know, honestly, I guess I don't really, I feel like I'm not really, I don't know if that's my job, actually. I think that, you know, in one way or another, I mean, it's a legitimate question, but in one way or another, I feel like for most of my painting life, there's been a kind of hard look at like, well, what's painting for? Like, why does anyone paint? What's the point of it? What is the job of painting? What can painting do for one? And I guess honestly, I don't go there really. I mean, I just assume that I'm a sentient being. I'm aware. I'm politically engaged. I felt, you know, that the last year the world has been on fire and so on. I don't deliberately try to inject that into my work. I just feel it will be there because I'm the maker. But I can't, beyond that, I can't really go anywhere with that question. That's how I feel. People, other persons. Karen, David.
I do love, I
Yeah,
mean,
well, I think, Medrie, that was what I was saying when they were saying, you know, painting can get caught up in formalist debate. And I'm saying even painting that is described as being about purely formal issues is about all kinds of other stuff that you can't keep out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think about Mondrian. I think about him a lot. I love his work. And he would look like the poster kid of this formalist, reductive, kind of step away from the world artist. But somehow, I mean, of course, you read his biography or you understand his ideas. He's way more engaged than something like that. But it's weird and interesting and alive. And
Yeah.
you know, we can't do that now. But
I hate to say this, but I think we're talking about that much maligned idea of something being better than something else. You know, if it's really good, it's talking to us on a lot of levels. I don't know if one's allowed to say that sort of thing in public anymore.
Well, why? I don't understand. Why not?
Because you're privileging one thing over another. One of my favorite words, privileging.
Oh,
Yeah. Anyway, that's a whole other question. Maybe we should move on to another one. We have what? Time for one more, Sam?
Sure. Yeah, there's still, I think there's a lot of painters in the crowd. So, well, let's see. Well, maybe this is a good question to end on. This from anonymous person. This is a question for both David and Medrie. How do you know when a work is finished? Do you ever feel like you went too far?
or not far enough.
yeah, this is the eternal question. Like, forget about it. There's no objective way. And by the way, if you go too far, you can reel it back. I mean, I kind of never throw anything out because painting has this great ability to be destroyed. You just wipe it out and start over or knock it down and bring it back. So this is maybe a little bit related to what we were talking about with Medrie, you know, this breaking and repair. But good luck finding an objective standard or a kind of even a reliable way of knowing. I mean, there's a million kind of metaphoric sort of inspirational things about, you know, like you're no longer in it anymore, or it's painted you out of it, or something like that. But those are all foggy. But I know when I'm done.
Yeah, that's a question I've heard many times, and it is a hard one to answer. Sometimes I've looked at things that I've done a few years later and thought, how could I have left it like that? Like, what was I thinking? But I've actually destroyed a lot of work. I kind of feel like at the age I am now, I don't want to leave a lot of sort of things that I think are not, that are sort of, they haven't made the cut. So I'm pretty brutal about it. I'll keep things around that I'm not sure of for a period of time. And if I can save them, I will. But if I can't, they're gone. They're history.
Do you ever have moments, Medrie? And I do, for sure. Like, and I'm looking at that painting right there. Like you're preparing a ground, let's say, and you go swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. You're just kind of knocking something in this basic way. And I think, oh my God, if I was like Raoul de Keyser or, you know, Christopher Wool, I'd be done, and that'd be
great.
But you know, I guess I'm not. You know, too bad. But I have destroyed so many great starts because they just kind of weren't me, really.
Yeah. Well, you have to work through that sort of stuff too. I've discovered a great way, though, to just to make it final, where if I look at something and I'm really convinced that it's a goner, I just take a single edge blade and run it all the way down the front of the canvas, and that's it. It's over.
Whoa.
No.
Here's how I know I'm done. If I am putting little nubs under the armpit of this person, and I'm like putting a little turquoise eyeliner, protagonist, I'm close.
Yeah.
In the risk of going too far, I'm going to sneak in one more question from Joyce.
Go for it, Sam.
What is influencing each of your color decisions?
Ooh. Okay, I'm going to say something that color is the feature of pictorial language that most effectively defies language. That color somehow is always in excess of or to the side of or never summarizable. And so the kind of, I'm just going to say that up front, but then I'm just saying that as a kind of introduction for Medrie to say something.
David, I have no idea what you just said.
I guess I'm saying the color.
What are you talking about?
Color to me pulverizes language. Color destroys language because it is always in excess of anything we can say about it. I mean, I'm being a little bit provocative. I haven't really thought this out. But it's the thing that anytime I hear somebody going into like color theory and talking about its relationship to this or that picture, it seems like nonsense to me.
I guess when you were saying that, I was thinking, well, in what way is that different than shape?
Yeah, so you do have a world of reference and, you know, blue sky and green trees and, you know, all that. But that's
so completely inadequate.
Yeah, and it's inadequate. And it doesn't really ever get to like the aggregated relation of a bunch of colors in one picture.
Like this one.
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the question was what influences you David, and you, Medrie, in your color decisions. And maybe that's a question you don't want to answer, but David's extremely high-minded disquisition on the difficulty of talking about color successfully avoided that question.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I would go there just in saying that sometimes I see a color. I just see a color, and I know something has to be that color. I don't know why. Or one of the paintings that is in my show at Tibor, I wasn't looking for this, but once I made the connection in my mind, it made it much easier to proceed with the painting. And it was just laying down one color next to another, and I suddenly thought of the favelas that I'd seen in Rio de Janeiro, and then it was like, bam! Then I could finish the painting because it sort of somehow it all fell into place at that moment. But usually color, yeah, it's weird. It's like, I mean, especially with these ones, sometimes they're almost completely monochromatic. And sometimes there's a lot of color. I don't have a program, I guess.
I have a little bit of a program, and it has to do with the disposition of the studio. If I can have like a handful of paintings up, and they have a kind of collective story. And there's a color version of that story, and I might think I can't do like this. I can't do another blue painting. There's already too much blue here. I need to go monochrome, or I need to try something, yellow and green, like acid yellow and green, a whole painting just like that, because that's what this room needs right now.
Well, that's interesting.
That's very not high-minded at all.
It's okay, David.
But that's in a way what you're saying. Like, what does this need? Or like, you don't even.
Yeah.
Some kind of sub-articulate problem solving.
Well, it's back to trusting those years of experience that you mentioned.
But do you, David, also? Well, it sounds like you do. You just it happens in a different way in the kind of hive of your studio, where, as I know, you have so much stuff around, drawing, sculptures, this, that. But you somehow at some point you see a color, like it comes into your head, and it's kind of the same thing with me as well. You know, that it's somehow. And maybe that is that ineffable thing that you're talking about. It's like, I don't know why. I just see a color and it has to be there.
Like, what is needed here?
Yeah.
Something is needed and a decision needs to be made. And you kind of take a deep breath and go with it. And don't think about it later.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an immediate thing.
Well, guys, it was really fun batting around with you. I feel like maybe we've spent our audience's attention. We've taxed it, or we've.
Well, we've given them something.
I hope so.
It's still quite a good crowd here. So thanks everyone for joining and adding to this conversation. And Medrie, David, and Karen, thank you so much for doing this. And I'll plug the show one more time because it's on at the New York Studio School until the 28th. And you can make an appointment by just going to the homepage of our website, nyss.org. And you can schedule a time to come see it. We're open at the building every day, and you just observe pretty standard safety practices. So would anyone like the last word before we turn off?
I just like to say it's been a delight to work with the two of you. It's really been fun, and very happy to have done this.
Me too.
Well,
Thank Karen Wilkin for like making it happen. What a
well, I think we had an indecently good time organizing this. It's one
It
of
was great.
really, really terrific experience. So now we have to think about what we do next.
That's right.
Survive.
Bravo.
Thank you both, and thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Bye.